Hey fam, it is the director, your comic art coach, Doc Solo, and welcome to the latest installment of Art to Art, where I sit down with artists, writers, inkers, character designers, anyone that you can think of in what we call the comic sphere. It's all adjacent. And so today, in honor of Black History Month, again, I would feel remiss as a Black creative if I did not take some time aside to give flowers and pay homage to the incredible contribution that Black artists have had on the landscape creatively and professionally and industrially. And so in this episode, I sit down with a living legend, someone that is not just a friend and a mentor, but we literally refer to one another as brother. He's my big brother. He took me under his wing when I first went to my very first comic art convention, my very first comic book convention, way back in the 90s. And he just took me under his wing, and he has nurtured me spiritually, creatively, and it's just, and I am largely who I am as an artist today because of this brother. And I'm not the only one who shares that sentiment. I don't know if you saw the interview with John Boy Myers. If you haven't, I'll try to leave a card here somewhere in this space as soon as I figure out how, so that you can go back and watch that video. But he even pays honor to this incredible artist who started off in comics like all of us, but has gone on to work for the companies such as Disney, DreamWorks, Fox Animation, toy design, movies, the whole nine yards. There is no limit to where this skill set can take you. And he's a prime example, not just as a Black artist, but as an artist in general, the profound impact and the set of skills that comics teach you, how far it can actually take you. So enjoy. I'm going to probably break this down into 4 segments because we actually talked for 5 hours, and I don't want to leave anything out. I'm just giving you guys a sneak peek into real conversations that I have with people in this industry. Not so much an interview, but more conversational, and we kind of go wherever the conversation leads us. And I don't want to leave anything out because hopefully you guys will find some value, some inspiration, some direction, okay? Because all of our paths are different, and that is the purpose of Art to Art. So check this out as I sit down with my brother, artist extraordinaire, whose skill sets know no bounds, the incomparable, the incredible Deon NuckolS. Part 1. Check it out. Hey, this is Doc Solo, the director of Ka-Pow, the Comic Art Academy, the real art school for real people with real lives, taught by real industry pros. And on this session of Art to Art, I have the unique privilege, because he doesn't do a lot of chats and interviews, and this is a conversation. See, Art to Art is more of a conversation than it is an interview. So I'm starting in my own backyard. I'm starting at home, and this is my brother. This man has had my back through thick and thin. He is a phenomenal talent. His name is Good in the March Streets, y'all. When I tell you his skill set is so expansive and ever expanding and profound, I'm not talking about somebody that just, dabbles here and there. I'm talking about somebody that when they take on a new endeavor creatively, he goes all in, and mastery is typically just around the corner. You blink and he's got it down. He's worked from everybody from Hasbro to DreamWorks to, listen, he's done it all. Okay. He's done it all. And I have the unique pleasure of calling him my big brother. If you saw any other episodes of Art to Art, you know that I'm very, very particular about titles and relationships. I don't like to exaggerate them. I believe when you do that, you kind of set yourself up for failure because the other person may not feel the same way that you do. But when I tell you, I can say in full confidence, this is my brother, and he adopted me, and we've been rocking for over 30 years now. And so it's my distinct pleasure to bring into the hot seat my brother, who I love to pieces, the incredible, the amazing, the outstanding Deon NuckolS. What up, bruh? You out there in sunny Cal? See all that sunshine? I'm down here in the basement. It's cold outside. Well, it's not that cold outside in Chicago. What's going on, man?
You love embarrassing me.
You blushing?
Really?
If you didn't think black folks can blush, look, and I'm not messing with the color temperature. I'm not messing with the color temperature whatsoever. What's going on, my beloved brother? What's good with it?
Good, man.
Now, as always, here on Art to Art, it's just a conversation. Though I do have some questions. I usually try to save them for the end. You know what I mean? But I want to kind of give you the mic. And again, I've been there. I've been a front row witness to your career, right? And I forget all the things that you have done. Right. So why don't you share with those? Because what we do here on Ka-Pow and Art to Art is we give those watching an opportunity to kind of peek behind the veil of the minds and the going ons with professionals in the comic craft. And I call it the comic craft because it's comics and all related industries, right? Because we know that opens the door. We're going to get into your story, which is amazing. And don't be afraid. Listen, don't be afraid to go church boy. Because we both church boys. I've warned them before, though I have honor studios for that, right? And I try to keep the church stuff to a minimum. It's who I am, and unapologetically Christian, right? It's unapologetically. Right. And so when we start talking, don't be surprised if a couple of amens and a couple of Jesus bombs falls up in the conversation, because you guys are just getting a peek of the type of conversations he and I have on a regular basis. And so I'm going to give you the mic. Tell little people about what you're willing to share. He doesn't like talking about himself, y'all. That's why this is a big deal, which I find bizarre. All the speaking that you do, like you're constantly doing like workshops, and I'm like, you the heads of teams. I'm like, what's up with the mic, man? Brag on yourself. Tell the folks who you are, what you do, and give us the 30,000 foot view.
It is weird. I really hate talking about myself. and Solo was showing some stuff earlier before we came on. I was like, oh no!
It was by accident. I was trying to hit him so you can get the reaction in real time. I got to get my setup game better.
Like, he's gonna make me talk about that. But to be honest with you, a little bit about myself is I started initially in doing independent comics, and honestly, that is kind of where I got my. I'm over here. I'm laughing so hard I got water. Oh my gosh! Comics was one of the things where I first initially got my desire to even draw. My cousin was a huge comic fan, and I saw him draw something, and it was like this lamb, but the lamb looked so cool. I was like, I want to do that. And then he saw my interest and was like, here's a bunch of comics. I mean, it wasn't just like one comic book here, one comic book there. He gave me like a box of comics.
Wow.
And during that time, it was like comics were a thing that you kind of gave, and then you gave to someone, or you traded with someone, or you threw them away later, But it started getting around to that point where I was running into people that were actually collecting comics. But for me, I think Spidey was the first one. And I remember sitting here drawing. I was probably I remember writing my age on it, because my dad was one of those people who was like, sign your name on it, put your age so people know when you did it. I was like, do that, But I remember putting 9 on there as an age, and I was like, to this day, I remember that Spider-Man drawing. Wow. It was pastel, like really soft. that crayon like pastel. And I was sitting there. I remember blending it, and trying to. It was a mess, man. But it was something that went on my wall,
Right.
and my door, and but from there, I fell in love with comics. I was doing independent comics. Then some friends ran into me, and they were like, "Hey, why don't you do, this book? I'm gonna hurt you after this solo."
we will get to it in depth. In depth.
I did this. So since we're gonna get in depth about it, I won't talk about it too much.
Okay.
So a book that I had done called Superior 7, and I remember a friend approaching me that we had met at a Comic-Con. I think it was, I want to say, well, I can't remember where it was, but the guy's name was Ben Torres, and this guy could draw his butt off.
Ben Torres?
Ben Torres, yeah. I remember looking at his work and going, dude, you are a beast. But I remember him coming to me and saying, you, by any chance, are you interested in some freelance work? And at that time, embarrassingly enough, I never knew what the word freelance meant. I'm like, what is freelance? I didn't know I could get paid, and not work for anybody directly, but actually get paid to draw the stuff that I, whether it's draw for somebody else or draw the stuff I love. And at the time, I was working. He was telling me that I could do some freelance for. At the time, it was called Kenner.
Okay.
And Kenner had all the rights to all the Star Wars stuff and the DC stuff. And so I was doing. He asked me, "Can you do some Batman figures?" Now I was like a huge Marvel fan. Matter of fact,
Spidey.
I got a Spidey.
It sticks with you, doesn't it? Right? It's like it sticks with you. Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I'm not a DC fan, but sure, I can pull off. I can maybe do a Marvel version of a Batman figure. And long story short, did that character for Batman or for the Batman team then, and then it all kind of like cascaded from there. And it went from working for Hasbro, where I was doing Jurassic Park, Gargoyles for Disney. I ended up moving from Ohio to Rhode Island to work on their entertainment team, where I was working on the show Transformers Beast Machines. Went from there, and we were doing a bunch of different show designs at that point, but then we left from recession hit, and I'm like, at that point I was stuck looking for work. I was able to do some things here and there, people from
so give us really quick, give us a little timeline from Superior 7 to the freelance work to Hasbro to Kenner.
The Superior 7 and the to Kenner were actually during about the same time. So I had probably done Superior 7 the year before, and then the year after ran into, because we were going to these conventions. We had done maybe, I think, 3 or 4 conventions. And Oh my God.
Oh,
There was, bro. This shit.
ooh, look at that! Look at that, man! Woo! All right, we won't get to that one yet, but yeah, that was different. Woo! I know, brings back memories, doesn't it?
Sure,
just to give you guys a little backstory, while prepping for this episode, I asked my brother, said, "Hey man, send me some of your artwork," and he sends me all of this last 5 years, 10 years stuff, and I'm like, I'm like, we not.
That's what you meant when you said you don't get out that easy. I'm like, that's a lot of work.
Right. I'm like, no. But it's amazing. You know, I tell the students at Ka-Pow often is that comics is very much, even today, it's a gateway to so many different fields and practices that I think many people snooze on, right? I've often referred to us as the special forces of the creative design army, right? We're the special forces. You know, most comic artists, people that have started in comics, right, with that initial love, including yourself, and you're a great example of this. It's easy for us, more than most, that have even been trained in one specific discipline. You know what I mean? This is my opinion, but this is what I've seen in my 30 years in the game, is that we tend to be plug and play in so many different fields in illustrative creative arts because of all the disciplines that are inherent and required just to do comics, if that's just where you wanted to stay. But its reach is so much more broader than that. What are your thoughts about
comics?
That? Yeah.
The thing about comics, what makes it so integral to entertainment in general for me, is I remember he was an older illustrator, and I was really down on myself because I'm like, oh, I'm not an illustrator like you. You know, I just like to do comics. And he was like, he looked at me, and you could literally see on his face, he was like, you have to know how to do architecture. You have to blah, blah, blah. You have to know how to do people. You know, you have to know how to draw cars. You know, you have to know how to draw all of that stuff. And on top of that, you have to know how to tell a story.
Right.
You know, so don't down yourself because you can't do all that. Once I learned that and started adding all of that to my repertoire, it opened a huge field for me to jump into. That was the reason why I was able to get into places like Hasbro, you know, or Kenner. That's the reason why I'm able to talk to someone at DreamWorks and do some stuff for them. I remember a guy that was working on, at the time it was for Fox, and it was on a project called what's it called, AXCOP. And
for Fox Animation, I remember that. Yeah, Fox Animation, yeah.
And be surprised how many of them did not have the fundamentals of drawing. And what comics does is it makes you draw like all time, and it makes you push yourself so that when things look a little off, you almost have to like kind of push yourself more to push that thing into a better. You said something earlier in regards to mastery, and it's you almost have to push yourself to master what it should look like. Like if you're doing a face, you're constantly pushing yourself to make sure that, look, I want to reach a level of excellence, you
Right.
know. And one thing that you know about me is, you know, that level of excellence comes from someplace else. It's
Right.
like, okay, God, this is what I want. This is what
Right.
I wanted to do. And I remember asking God directly and saying, I want to do something with my art. You know, how can I do that? And this was like after I got married, and I'm thinking, I'm working in the meat packing plants. I'm working in what was the other one? It was meat packing plant. Oh, it was a bank. And I'm like, I hate all of this. I'm like, God, would you give me a job where I can use my art? And I remember one day asking God, I was like, I want to do a comic book that kind of is a cool comic that when people see it, they'll go, wow. And that
Right.
was one of the ones you showed earlier, which is Emissary.
Emissary.
You know, and I was sitting there going, well, what can I do? And I remember God saying to me, which, you know, some people won't believe, like I tend to tell them, true story. When I go that one, when I talk about I'm looking for a way to do a comic, he gave me this idea, and I'm like, okay, but, and I remember him saying, Iron Man. I was like, Iron Man? It was just like out of nowhere. I heard the word Iron Man. Iron Man? What does that mean? And it was Ephesians 6, put on the whole armor of God. And then I was like, okay, so if I did this character and this helmet, like each of their masks represents the helmet, the breastplate, their armor, every bit about them. You know, the sword that she's carrying is the sword of the spirit. You know, everything about them. The one character who is white and gold off to the right is Dunamis, which was a Greek word for power.
Right.
You know, an explosive power. And I thought, people don't get to see or even hear all of these cool things, and it's being downloaded to me like at Mach 10. And I'm just like, how can I get this, get all of this down? And so this was one after, I literally told the friends I was working with on the comic I was doing before this one that I was leaving, and that I was going to pursue something that was going to make me happy, which is the Emissary comic. And
now this is I'm sorry to interrupt. This is very near and dear to me because this is where we cross paths, right?
I was going to say that. I was going to say this is when you and I actually met.
Yeah, and I remember you and we're just going to kind of give them a little peek into, and we're going to come back to the story, but I just want to give you guys a little peek to how far this rabbit hole goes. You mentioned like working at a bank. I don't know if you know this, but it was Wizard World Chicago. It was 1995. You know why I remember that? Because I was working at a bank. And and I'd never been to a comic book convention before, right? I'd never been to a comic book convention before. And I'd been bitten by the bug. And we're going to talk about your affirmation moment, but I had gotten affirmed that I had potential for this, right? By an editor at Valiant Comics. And so I really wanted to kind of get familiar with the culture. and Wizard World Chicago was coming in. And mind you, you guys got to remember, the internet was at its infancy then, right? It was in its infancy then.
Right.
And there was no social media. That was not a thing. Okay, so we were still doing things by fax, email. People were still using word processors, the whole 9 yards, right? Snail mail. And a Christian guy, George Mackus, who I still love to this day. I was a part of a Christian fanzine, right? And he was from Chicago, and he says, "Hey, you can join me at my table for free at Wizard World Chicago. I just need help manning the Christian table." And I remember going to my boss. Her name was Ronnie. And I asked her if I could have the time off, and she told me no. She's like, "No. And if you don't show up, you're going to be fired." It was on a Saturday. And I'm like, Saturday? And I worked in corporate accounts. And it was one of those rare times when we had to work on a Saturday. We had to do some type of inventory cleaning of files, that kind of stuff, right? And I remember, because we were living in a small studio apartment, Toy and I was traumatized because we weren't that far away from welfare. We had just gotten off of public aid like the year before. Right. And that was back with the funny money, with the Monopoly money, the little books.
Oh,
you ever had those, right?
those
with all the
books.
green, yep. Yeah, the little books. Not the little sleek little card they have today that looks like a credit card that you can just swipe. Nope. It was like you got to pull out and count. Everybody seeing you with this book with all this, and they know what it is. You know what I mean? You counting out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know what I mean? And so anyway, right. And so we had gotten, we were just maybe a year removed from that. So the trauma and the fear, because I remember Kennedy was on the way. We had 3 kids and one on the way, right? And I didn't know. I'm like, okay. So I came home with the toy, and this is where having a spouse that's got your back comes in. You know, she wanted it probably more than I did. You know, that responsibility. You don't want to do anything to put your family in harm's way, financially or any other way. And she's like, "I believe God wants you to go." I'm like, "But babe, if I go, I'm getting fired." Right? Like, she made it quite clear. Like, she didn't mince any words. If you do not show up, don't show up on Monday. Right? You're done. And she's like, "We'll work it out." So I went, and that was the weekend I met you. Our tables were right next to each other. You and Kevin, and you guys were selling like hotcakes. I was in total awe, right? I was like, "Oh my gosh." We were in Artist Alley right next to one another. And I remember we talked nonstop in between sales. Yep. And from there, let's just give you the history lesson. From there, I need to ask you, because not many people do this. And I've always wondered. From there, we made a connection. And I don't know if you remember, but you invited me to your home, and you were still in Ohio, and I went to Ohio, and you gave me my first light box. I didn't even know what a light box was. You gave me a light box that was broken, and you were like, the cord was broken. That red light box. Do you remember that? Do you remember that? Yeah, that big red box. It took me years to toss that away, and I'm like, I can fix this, because I was an electronics repairer in the military. I'm like, "Oh, I can fix this." Well, he said, "If you can fix it, you can have it." I'm like, "Okay." Right? But you opened up your heart and your door to me. What was it about me that made you feel okay to just kind of help this kid out?
Dude, we had, when we initially sat down, we had so much in common. You literally, when I put the book on the table, you were like, "Hey, can I take a look at this?" Yeah, oh, absolutely. And you're sitting there looking through it. You immediately got it. And I'm like, so when we were talking, we started sharing our beliefs with one another. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there going, what are the odds that we're going to meet, another believer? Matter of fact, you remember Julian and his team? Mm-hmm. They showed up. It was like, matter of fact, he went and got somebody else, and later on invited me to his house. Wow. Which was, I don't think I ever told you that part of the story, but it was feeling And true story, it was this feeling of God saying that he's okay. And matter of fact, that time you were like just, I think you were like interview or something like that. You were waiting to hear back or something
from the police department.
In regards to the police department, yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
And I'd never heard the other part of the story that they were going to fire you from the other one.
They fired me.
I just thought you were already looking for work.
No, they fired me, bro. She gave me the axe. They fired me, and I remember I knew I was going to get fired. Tori was okay with it, and I enjoyed I learned it was exposure to the culture was huge for me. Right. I never knew what that world looked like. Right. I'd already been at the animation studio, had interned, I had to find a real job, all that stuff. I had met my mentor at the animation studio, but I didn't know what the world, that culture looked like. It was foreign to me. And of course, for those of you all who are old enough to remember, Wizard World Chicago was a massive show. It was the gateway show for the entire comic industry. Every year, it was the gateway show that launched the convention season. And that back then, Marvel and DC and all the big publishers would show up. They had big old displays. They don't even do that anymore. Maybe they do it at San Diego. I don't know. Right. And maybe New York. I don't know. I've never been to New York. But back then, Wizard World Chicago was huge. Dude, and it was Chicago overwhelming.
It was huge.
Yes, it was huge. And I was like a deer in the headlights, to be quite honest. And it was literally shortly after that show that me not knowing, because I knew the police department was going to take forever. I'm like, we about to go back on public aid, but the Lord provided, and I was in the academy like within a few months. You know what I'm saying? After that show, because it launched my love of the comics and related industries. It was because I went to that show, and I lost my job in the process. you know what I mean?
Sometimes you gotta lose stuff to gain stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Facts.
Because that thing that was holding you. We've talked about this before. The thing that was holding you back was the thing that you had to get rid of.
Yeah.
And in order for you to even be remotely blessed, that had to be out of the way before you could actually begin to experience where God actually wanted to put you.
Facts. I got nothing.
I've always been a strong believer of that. Like going back to when you were saying how we met, it was very few people, I think, that when you meet them that you just go click like that. That happens rarely, but when you do, it's like, oh, this is someone to hold on to, and Facts. I remember us having conversations, us sharing ideas. I don't remember you coming down in Ohio. You took me back when you did that one. You remember the red, as soon as you said the red light box, I was like, completely forgot about that.
I came down there for a weekend, and that's when I first saw Superior 7. I met your mom. You introduced me to your mom, and it was just for the 2 days because I had to work. Then I think I was in the academy or about to start the academy. But yeah, you invited me, and it was actually later that you invited me to Rhode Island, right? It was actually later when you all look at my work now, those of you who are familiar with my work. My digital journey, literally, I owe to Deon. Literally. Because he had the Mac Power PC, the G5. Right? You remember that? Right? with the tower. You had the Power PC, and I knew that he was working. And again, the impact that you've had on me, I'm not saying this to exaggerate on the bromance. I do not exaggerate I'm not an exaggerator by nature. I'm very pragmatic. I don't like to embellish. I don't like people who do that. You know what I mean? I definitely want to be that guy. But when I tell you the impact that you've had on me personally, I am largely who I am as an artist today because of your influence. When you invited me to Rhode Island, when I'd started Honor Studios. Remember, I said, I want to do Honor Studios. You were there from the beginning. I'm like, I want to do this, but I don't know anything about digital art. All I knew was pencil and paper. Remember, that's all I knew was pencil and paper. I didn't know anything about markers, colored pencils. You know what I mean? All I knew was I knew how to draw and I knew how to tell a story, right? And you were like, well, why don't you come and spend some time with me in Rhode Island? I have a Mac. And back then it was the state of the art Mac. You had it. You know, and I remember the house. I remember it was very, very rustic, very homey. You know what I mean? The boys were little, Vicky, and I came out there, and you gave, because you got to remember, people, this is what it took back then. Okay, now everything is at your fingertips. Back then it wasn't. It was about being able to get access, right? And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, of the importance of access to information. But for many of us, especially creators of color, because of where we come from, our neighborhoods, at that time, there was limited access to information. And so that if you were highly talented, or if you had some type of proficiency, you really hit the lottery if you had somebody in your circle who knew somebody to tell you where to go and how to move. You know, I remember, I remember when I came out, you invited me out. This is years later now. We've been rocking for 20 plus years when I created the app. And you said, come out and we're going to put together a test group for you. And Carlos, and I'm going to have him on here, Los, opened up his house. And we were sitting around, and I tell people this, and now I'm starting a nonprofit next year because of this, right? Called Portal Creative Access. And after the app, you know, it was a lot of us people of color, Hispanic, Black, whatever. And of course, you know, white people were there as well. Some incredible people. But I noticed that as we were talking, the people of color, we all had similar stories. And I was like, how did you break in, Los? How did you break in? You know what I mean? And all of us were introduced by somebody outside of our community.
Somebody else.
That knew the verbiage and knew, because what were the two catchphrases we got in the hood? Commercial art, graphic design. And here it is, I'm drawing Mickey Mouse and Spider-Man. And you telling me something about commercial art and graphic design. And I'm drawing Spider-Man and Batman and, you know what I mean, Wolverine. I'm like, what does that have to do? But we didn't, these were our well-intentioned, but ill-informed loved ones that didn't have the information. Like for me, it was my godmother. It was my godmother, right? Now, granted, had I had my parents, though they were amazing, they were baby boomers and they weren't largely that interactive with all the things. If it didn't have anything to do with school and church, they were largely disinterested, right? And so my parents didn't really kind of like reinforce it like that, my art, even though my mom was the one who first put a pencil in my hand. But it was my godmother, whose sister, I called her Aunt Mo, was a creative art director at Leo Burnett, which was a massive, one of the largest ad agencies in the country that was here in Chicago. 6 Degrees, know somebody who knows somebody. But that level of access, we largely didn't have that then. So you had to go to where people were, right? And so like when you invited me out to Rhode Island, back to the point, that was access for me, right? Even me getting into the animation studio, you know, when I came back home from the military, that was my godmother who made that move, right? From somebody that went to school with her and my mom to high school, right? You know, and she's white, Irish, you know, but she had access. And she's like, oh, do you remember little Dwayne? He's like, yeah, he used to draw at Bible study. Now this dude, he 15 plus years at Hanna-Barbera, like come and intern at my studio. I'm like, what? You know, but it was access. We didn't have access. And surprisingly enough, in today's marketplace, despite the advantage of the internet, the advantage of social media, believe it or not much has changed, and you would think it would have. I run into kids all the time at shows and not even at Comic Cons. I'm talking about like at library shows, right? When I'm invited to go do things at schools to promote Ka-Pow. And high schools, they have no idea that there's people that look like us earning good livings doing all of this stuff. You know what I mean? And so anyway, back to the point, boomeranging it back around. You invited me out to Rhode Island. And it was transformative for me, right? This is the power of mentorship, people. Okay, shameless plug. This is what we're trying to provide here at Ka-Pow, because Ka-Pow was designed, patterned off of my experiences. You understand what I'm saying? And I can only do what I know, right? And I know the value of mentorship. And Deon mentored me. He invited me to his home. He fed me, he housed me, and he stayed up to as long as he could before he had to go to work the next day, running me through Photoshop. I remember that. And I was like, again, deer in the headlights. I didn't know what I was looking at. I'm looking at tablets, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and layers, what are those? And blend modes, what's that mean? You know what I mean? And I remember, and you would introduce me to some concepts. And then you'd be like, all right, I'm off to bed. And I'd be up to like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. Click, click, click. To that point, that darn rabbit, that black rabbit. All right, people. So
you gotta mention the rabbit.
The rabbit. All right. Not much. Now at this point, I'm on the police department a couple of years, right? So not much scares me. But you gotta remember, this is like, the house was quaint and it was comfortable, but it was older. So it had these kind of like these Amityville horror vibes.
It was 100-year-old house.
It had these Amityville horror vibes. You know what I mean? All that character and ambiance. And so, you know, us black folks, when we go to bed, we turn off all the lights. Just know that. So we ain't paying no bills while we sleeping. You know what I mean? That's how it is in black houses. Turn off that light, boy. Right? And so the only light in this house was the light emanating from the computer screen. Right? So I'm sitting there in the dark and I'm zoned in. I'm clicking and I'm learning. I'm getting it. And all of a sudden I hear something. I'm like, what was that? Then I hear it again. I'm like, hold up now. It's pitch black, y'all. The only screen is like this. All this light is coming from this screen. That's all I see. And I can't see nothing into this dark. And all of a sudden I feel something, because you know, we in somebody's house, so we got our shoes off. I feel something go past my feet. And I'm like, oh my God. And they had this huge, was it a dwarf rabbit? It was huge.
Yeah.
This thing was huge, and it was jet black. When I say black, didn't have white nowhere. Eyes black, fur black, and he never told me he had a rabbit. I didn't get the rabbit memo. I didn't get the rabbit memo. But this thing is out of its cage.
What he didn't know is we would open the cage door for it to like come out. So it would, because a lot of times it wouldn't let you just pull us out. It wouldn't let us pull it out of the cage. So open the door and it would let itself out of the cage, and then it would come into my office. I was the alpha. So it would come
which was where I was working. Which was where I was working in your office. And no one tells me this.
Forget to tell him. But I also completely forgot to close the door to the cage. And when he told me that next morning,
man, I was trying not to wake up everybody in the house, because literally I was like, oh my God, oh. Right, and I'm trying not to fall. I'm trying to be quiet, but I was, and I still didn't know it was a rabbit. I just literally, I cut off the computer and I went to bed. I didn't know what that was. I'm like, all right, that's it. We're done. We're done for tonight. It's gonna be what it is till the sun come up. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fun.
But the power.
He tells that tell that story, I always laugh.
Man, listen, that's one of those ones that stick with you, okay? And when I tell you though the value that you brought me, now when people see me zip through these programs and all the programs I've learned since, technology was very intimidating for me. As much most Gen Xers at that time, when it was, even though we helped usher it in, it was something new. You know what I mean? Like, oh my gosh, will you be able to do this? And you were always so encouraging. You were a phenomenal teacher.
But you were, when you came over, you had such a drive to learn the program that it was like, I want to make sure that he leaves with something, because if he doesn't, the trip is for nothing. And
right.
Your thing was, you didn't look remotely scared of the program at all. You were like, okay, show me. And when you have people like that really want to learn it, you get caught up because they like what you like, and you both are, are on that same wavelength. Like, okay, here's what it does.
Right.
But he would stay up. I didn't realize I left the light. I turned all the lights off. I'm sorry.
All the lights. It was jet black up in there. And I'm okay because I ain't scared of the dark. But when that thing started moving and I started hearing these noises and I felt something go past my feet, I'm like, oh yeah, we're done. Click. Time to go to bed. Yeah, that's all she wrote. But even there, you took time out. You gave me a tour of Hasbro, which was again another. It was there that I realized the power of environment, right? The energy there was palpable. The creative energy there was palpable, like it was at the animation studio. Remember, I hadn't experienced that since I left the animation studio, and I was at the studio. I interned there for a little bit over a year, but it still wasn't enough. You know what I mean? And I remember coming into Hasbro and seeing where you worked, and just seeing everything was so conducive to creativity and to spur imagination, and even you introduced me to your supervisors, and they allowed you to bring me in, and seeing the things like the maquettes. I still remember that Goliath maquette. Oh my gosh, you had this big old Goliath maquette. I'm like, oh my god, it was gorgeous. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Stuff that never saw the light of day, just concept stuff.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that thing was gorgeous. But yeah. You left your fingerprints on me, and you helped give me confidence in areas that I don't think you realized. You know what I'm saying? Number one, seeing someone that looked like me operating at these levels, and granted, we're not trying to make this a racial thing, but that's not mince words. That's one thing I'll just know this. I will say the things that you cannot. I'm that guy. This is my platform. So if there's anything you want me to say, just pass the ball, right? But I keep it a buck, right? Race does play a matter, and I'd never realized how much it did, because we project ourselves on to our mentors, onto the people that we admire, right? I didn't realize how I should have realized it, but you kind of lose it after a while. But it was actually when the pandemic hit, and I started teaching on this platform called OutSchool just before I opened Ka-Pow, and I didn't realize the power of imagery until parents started inboxing me, right? As their kids would sign up for, and I quickly became a 5-star instructor on this platform. And there was like, yes, your art is great. You're an industry professional. It's like, but when my son or when my daughter saw that you were black, they were like, oh my God, because there was so many people that were teaching art, right? Now, granted, admittedly, very few on a professional caliber, right? They were mostly teachers, because it was for teachers to earn money during the pandemic. So, art teacher is not the same as professional artist, right? We'll talk about that. That'll be an upcoming video, right? Because we have art teachers that apply for Ka-Pow, and I'm like, but it was mostly for teachers to earn income. But when they saw that I was a professional artist, that was the bait but I didn't realize how much of a hook it was when they saw my profile. You know what I mean? And I kept those emails. And it was during that experience that I retrocast. I'm like, this is what Deon was for me. You know what I mean? Because I was like, he was somebody that I could project myself onto, and I could see myself doing this. You know, you can imagine yourself doing it, but seeing yourself doing it is a whole nother level of movement, in my opinion. And I think that matters because what a lot of people don't realize, I don't know if you realize this stat, the needle hasn't moved much since the last report was taken. But in 2019, UCLA did a study of the racial breakdown in the creative arts industry. That includes comics, animation, character design, the whole spectrum, right? And this is in 2019. Black people, specifically, we represent less than 5% of the community as a whole. Less than 5%. You know what I mean? So when I tell you representation matters, I'm not talking representation as in, you know, affirmative action where it isn't earned. I'm talking about representation of people doing it at the highest level, right? And putting them on a platform and letting them be seen and recognized. That stuff matters, bro. What is your thought on that?
I was just speaking to a group of college kids over at the name of the college, Cypress College, and they became super excited. Just, I mean, their teachers are black. But when it came to me actually talking to the group and telling them this is what I do for a living, a lot of them didn't know that there was more out there. They could actually do more. And they're like, wait a minute, you do this, you've done this, you've done that. It's extremely important because the job I work at, I can literally count on my hand, or maybe hands, how many people of color work there, you know, or should I say black people. Because when we say people of color, you know,
that's a broader spectrum. Yeah,
it's a really broad spectrum.
Right.
So, you know, so if I'm saying black, you know, and needing that representation, there was one young man that worked over at Kenner, and I'm like, oh, dude, you are super talented. I mean, this guy did the designs for Optimus Primal, and he had been to the studio. The studio had said this is what he's going to look like. He remembered what it was going to look like and then drew it. And I'm sitting there going, this black guy right here. I'm going, dude, you are a phenomenal artist. I mean, he was. It was almost like, and I'll come back to the point. It was almost like he was, what do they call people that, not necessarily on the spectrum, but
a savant.
Savant, thank you. That's what he felt like to me. Having that representation in the field, the guy that saw me was not a black man.
Right.
You know, it was a white man. And
same for me.
For me, he was like, I love what you do. Have enough of us in the industry to go, I like what you do.
Right.
You know, to the point where I'm willing to teach you more. Because 9 times out of 10, I was telling these students, what you learn in here is going to become moot and void. Because you really learn on the job. And if you don't have someone to kind of get next to, especially if you're black and it's just you, sometimes you feel alone in
Yeah.
the industry, and it's nice not to feel alone. It's a great feeling, that camaraderie with, especially someone that looks like you.
Right.
And I hear a lot of kids say, um, they're excited because they saw someone that looked like them. We've even got to the point where it's
Lost your mic.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you now. Yep.
Okay. It. I had someone approach me and was like, does this look okay? Does this look good? And it was him asking for approval in regards to that black character. I'm like, why didn't you just give me the black character to do?
Right.
And you wouldn't even have to worry about necessarily doing this.
Right.
And nothing in regards to, no offense to the individual, because he was very sensitive about making sure that we were represented correctly. But it's just, we don't, in this industry, it's very minimal. Like when I go into studios, I go into toy companies, things like that. It's rare. I can there's a black person.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
And this is 2023. This is 2023.
This is 2023. Right.
You know what I mean? It's kind of
It's extremely important to answer your question.
Yeah, and I'm glad because you have so much experience in so many different fields of the creative craft, of the comic craft. Talk about how, and we're going to sit here for a minute because this is blessing somebody, right? I know there's a young aspiring black artist somewhere, and granted, all are welcome on this conversation, but right now we're talking specifics because everyone's journey is not the same, right? It's not the same. The classism, all that stuff still happens here in good old US of A. Right? There's ceilings on many of us. I experienced it in law enforcement, pervasive. Okay. And I tell those stories. I believe these things have to be told if there's going to be change in the marketplace, because we are consuming this stuff. And this is what people don't understand. We are viable consumers in the marketplace of the action figures, the video games, the comics, the movies, the MCU, the whole 9 yards. We're spending our dollars here. And yes, it's great when you put a black person in the director's chair, and we won't go into Marvel, but there's been a whole thing about that too, that you're putting people that aren't really the cream of the crop of what we can do. Hence, whether intentional or not, you're setting us up for failure and to look bad. You know what I mean? Because there's some real people of black folks that got them skills, man. You know what I mean? They like yourself that are out there and they can do the thing and do it at such a high level. Again, because I don't know about you, but I grew up in the era, and you grew up in the similar era where, and it's here's the funny thing, it's still valid that we had my mama used to tell me, I'm sure your mama did too. You got to be twice as good as the white kid. I was getting this in school.
Twice as good and work twice as hard.
And work twice as hard. You understand? And because that was just to get an equal opportunity. We're not even talking about equal outcomes. In the hopes of getting an equal opportunity. You got to be twice as good and work twice as hard. That's a 4X factor, right, of operation. For those of you who math, twice as good, twice as hard, that's 4. That's a 4. That's 4X. Okay? But I saw it when I was in the military, right? Granted, it had nothing to do with creative. It's a societal issue, right? It's about society and culture, right? It's independent of any particular field of expertise. My mom experienced it in nursing. I experienced it in law enforcement, the whole 9 yards. But with knowing that, seeing the next generation come behind us. Like one of my students right now, when you apply for our school, it's a conversation like this. Ask me whatever. I'm an open book, and you've known that about me from Jump Street. I tell it all, right? Okay. She was like, "Are you just a figurehead, or is this your school?" Right? And she's my girl Lauren, who I interviewed, and I'm like, "No, it's my school." She says, "So I can see your work." And she saw more. She's like, "Okay." Because the representation mattered to her. You understand? She wanted to know what she stands to encounter as, now granted, she's a black woman, but a black person nonetheless. But what am I going to run into should I pursue this course? Right now, she's a superstar student. She's killing the game. I can't wait for her. She's going to be part of our first graduating class. But it mattered to her. And I'm like, no, we have to not just show up, but we got to show up and show out. And more of us need to be more vocal. I told you, this is an incredible creative force in our marketplace. And I am so happy to bring my good friend and mentor and big brother to you guys, so you guys can meet him. He doesn't do a lot of interviews, and so I was so fortunate and blessed that he agreed. He made it quite clear, Solo, only for you. But his reach has far extended beyond just me. He has had a profound effect on many creators throughout his storied, tenured, and varied career across the spectrum of the comic craft. And hopefully you guys are connecting the dots and seeing for yourselves just how far this all-encompassing creative skill set can take you. And if you like more information on Ka-Pow, the Comic Art Academy, and you want to explore how far it can take you in particular, check us out at kapowschool.com. And hey, we're enrolling now. And so now's a great time as we get ready for our 24-25 school year. And so you have to apply. Again, we don't take everybody, only 15 seats, but actually as of yesterday, 13 seats are remaining. We like to keep the school small and intimate so we can give you guys all the TLC and the nurturing in the comic craft and mentoring that we can muster. And so listen, follow us everywhere on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. Well, not so much Twitter. We don't do a lot on Twitter, but Instagram, TikTok, Twitch, everywhere your social media is, we will be there. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. We'd love to see what more you'd like to hear from us, and we want to bring it to you. This is an educational resource, an inspirational resource, hopefully, and intended to broaden your horizons. We're going to be doing some drawing and all that great stuff here, and tutorials and actual excerpts from our class called Class Pass. So stay tuned, like, follow, subscribe, do all the things. And listen, remember, like I always say, life is short. So live each day as if it were your last, knowing that when all is said and done, all that will ever be remembered is the life you've lived, the lives you touched, and the stories you've created. So knowing that, what are you waiting for? Get to drawing. Solo out. Ka-Pow.